A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors came out in 1987, and it is the third year in a row that I've been doing my spooky season reviews, and I started off by talking about the original. Last year I talked about number 2, Freddy's Revenge, and this year I get to talk about this incredible sequel, which I consider one of, if not the greatest horror sequel of all time. Now, mind you, I do have to see more horror sequels, from big franchises. But when I think of slasher films, I think that this film perfectly builds on the first one. Now, I talked about the second one last year, and I did actually rewatch it last night. I rewatched the first one sometime last week, and then I attempted to do a double feature of 2 and 3 last night, which I did also watch last year. I just didn't review this one last year, and I got about halfway through this movie, and ironically fell asleep, but I'd seen it before and then I just finished it today. And that's nothing on the movie, that's just me. It was very, very late, but 2 just sucks. It's just so stupid. And what I like about this movie is that it doesn't even acknowledge that one exists. It builds on the first one, and that's something, just jumping straight into it. That's something that I think every single sequel needs to do. It needs to take what's great about the one that came before it, or one of the films that came before it, and then just build on it and add to the greatness of whatever one it was. So in this case, it just adds to the greatness of that first one, and the first one was like the first slasher film I ever saw, so I really love that movie. I still think it's one of the best horror films of all time, besides the last minute of the movie. It is a fantastic movie, and this one is just as good as that first one. Personally, I still do prefer the original, but I really love this film, and as I said before, I do think it's probably just as good as that first one. There's so many great elements here, and I'm going to go into a lot of them in this video, so major spoiler warning. If you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend it. I know a lot of people, as soon as they watch 2, will be instantly turned off by the rest of the franchise. Now mind you, I've only seen 1, 2, and 3. I have them all. I think next year I'm going to finally just watch through them all. I was going to do it this year, but I have no time. But anyway, massive spoiler warning here, because I'm going to talk about a lot in this film. So you can't talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise without talking about the greatest slasher villain of all time, Freddy Krueger, and I think so far from what I've seen, this is the best film that deals with him as a character, because it builds on the creepiness around him. Now, do I think that he's definitely more iconic in the original, but do I think that he's portrayed better? Maybe, but I think that this one works with that original. Again, just totally forgetting about number 2. I think it works with the original because we learn more about the story also with his mother in here. We do see his mother as this nun, and you don't learn until like the very end of the film that she's actually in it, and it just kind of goes, and the one doctor here, what's his name, Neil, is that his name? I think his name's Neil. He walks over to a grave and sees that that's her, that's the nun that he's been talking to throughout the entire movie. And there's one scene in particular, one of the biggest scenes in the entire franchise, I think, where she tells the story about Freddy Krueger and Amanda Krueger, and how she was stuck at this place with a bunch of horrible people, and they did horrible things to her, which I will not say, obviously. And then when people found her, they found her with a son, Freddy Krueger. And then that explains so much more with Freddy, because he has so much trauma, and then obviously we know what happened to him, how he got burned alive, everything we learned in the first one. And I find that so interesting here, and I find it so interesting that the way they have to finish off Freddy in this movie is by, finding his remains, as they say. And we bring back, obviously, Nancy's dad here, and talking about bringing back Nancy and her dad, I think they did it in probably the best way possible. Because earlier on in the movie, we find that Nancy doesn't really have a good connection with her dad. They very much drifted, and Nancy's mom is just not alive anymore. And I think that not showing him much in this movie really worked, because they go and they find him at that bar, and the way that they bring back Nancy is perfect. I mean, it is just so well done. And if I'm not wrong, this was actually Patricia Arquette's debut movie role. I think probably one of my favorite actresses now that I really think about it. True Romance, Boyhood, this one, like so many great films, and she is so good here. But she starts singing, the very famous rhyme, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, 3, 4, better lock your door, and she keeps singing it. And then as she's, saying it to all the people in this hospital, this mental hospital, will say, no, that like psychiatric ward. I think that's a better way to describe it. It cuts to her and she finishes it off. She looks older. She's got hair. She's got like one streak of hair it's not like gray, but it's lighter, I'll say, and it's just like the perfect way, and she like calms her down and everything. And talking about the characters here, I think that one of the biggest problems with 2 is that all the characters suck. They are terrible. They are annoying. Obviously the movie is very weird and like the dancing scenes and everything, but I already talked about that last year. You can check that out. I'll link it down below and up here. But I care so much about the characters in this movie, and that's one thing I guess with any movie, but especially horror films and slashers. You can watch a slasher movie and not care at all about the characters, and it makes the movie so much worse because you don't care if someone gets stabbed in the head, which is obviously a terrible thing to say. But here, when they're in the dreams, I think it's so interesting because in the real world, you know, they are in the psychiatric ward, I think is the best word to describe it, and they've all attempted, so they have some issues with their brain and their mental health, I'll say. So when we see them in the dream, they all have this certain power, and I find that so interesting. Yes, you could say that some of them are a little silly, like the Wizard Master is typically the one that gets picked on, and yeah, it can be a little silly, but I think the scene, him versus Freddy, is really cool, where the wheelchair comes down, and I think that just the idea of him walking in his dream is so interesting because obviously he could before, but after his attempt, he's now stuck in this wheelchair. We have Joey, who's a very interesting character, probably like the definition of a stereotypical like 14-year-old boy filled with hormones that I think so funny. We have, you know, that really badass girl. We have Patricia Arquette's character, Kristen, I think her name is, and then that really, really funny guy who has some of the best lines in the entire movie.
The byproducts of guilt, psychological scars stemming from moral conflicts and overt sexuality.
Oh, great. Now it's my dick that's killing me.
And also this movie has probably one of the most disturbing scenes I think I've seen it in a horror movie. Like, it's not like terrible, oh, I have to look away, but just when you're watching it, it shows so much and it works, and that's the whole puppet scene. It's, again, spoilers, as I said before, it's the first death amongst all these kids, and, you know, he's walking around like this, and you know, stuff like that, and it adds to it the layer that all these kids have attempted. Obviously, you guys know what I mean by that. So when you see it and it's coming out of his feet, and then it cuts to that amazing shot, one of my favorite visuals in all of horror, where you see Freddy above and he's controlling him like a puppet, and then this character is standing on the ledge. Obviously, it goes to show that he does end up falling because Freddy does kill him. I think that that is so interesting, and we actually care because not only are these young characters, yeah, but it's so cool. And this movie also has not only one of my favorite lines in horror, one of my favorite lines of all time. Here it is.
Welcome to prime time, bitch!
Welcome to prime time, bitch. Whoosh. I think it's just so awesome. I know that this one kind of started the trend of Freddy being more comical, and again, I haven't seen anything past this point in the franchise, so I don't know where it goes from there. I think that it's just such an interesting movie. It's filled with just this amazing cast of people and characters. I think the characters are so well written here. This wasn't directed by Wes Craven, but it was written by him. I think Frank Darabont had some role in it. I've heard that. I just think that that's absolutely crazy. And it does actually have some of my favorite scenes in all of horror, some of my favorite visuals too. The actual look and colors of the film really stand out to me. Again, I love that original. I think it's a great movie, but when it comes to the cinematography, I really love this film, and maybe it also stands out to me because 2 looks so bland. The color grading in that movie is horrible, but here we have one of my favorite shots of all time where obviously, you know, it's that scene with Taryn, pretty sure that's her name, and you guys know what I'm talking about, and Freddy lifts up his gloves and it just shows the needles because she's an ex-addict, and I think that's so interesting. And there's that really gross shot of her arms. She's always just like, ugh. And there's some pretty gross things here. Some of it, sure, you could say is dated, like some of the special effects, but really, I don't care at this point. This was 1987, and it's really impressive what they've done there. I think that visual where Freddy shows all the souls of the children on his stomach always grosses me out. I'm like, oh, that's so creepy and so gross, but also so smart because it shows why he's more powerful here. And again, as I said before, I love the return of Nancy. She's one of my favorite characters in all of horror. She's probably my favorite final girl, either her or the lead character from Scream, obviously both by Wes Craven, so major props to him. And the director, Chuck Russell, did a really great job. This film is like an hour and a half, and it doesn't fly by, but it also doesn't drag on. It's just like that perfect runtime, and everything that happens in the movie is just feels so important. It's just a very satisfying movie for me. That's probably not the best word to describe it, but as a fan of horror, and especially Freddy Krueger, the character is my favorite slasher of all time, as I've mentioned several times on the channel. I think this movie is satisfying in that way, and it also just looks amazing, as I said, and all the props and the practical effects are so good. I mean, that opening sequence is like so creepy. It really is. Like, I don't feel scared while watching this movie. I don't at all with the other ones like I would do with other movies, but like when I'm watching it, I'm just like, oh, that's so creepy how, she gets up, from bed, she wakes up in the dream. I think I've said a bunch of times. I apologize, but then the camera backs out and you just see Nancy's old house and it's all like, horrored up, I'll say like that, and it's all dark. And then that little girl on a little tricycle, goes up, not like The Shining, but kind of, and then she's like, oh, Freddy's home. And then Kristen goes into the room with all the Elm Street kids and they're all hung, like stuff like that is just, it's creepy, but it's so smart. I really think this is a great horror sequel. It's one of the most underrated films of all time for me, super underappreciated. There's so much about this film that is really great. I feel like fans of A Nightmare on Elm Street really love this movie, but the general public, and when you look at general horror lists, they don't give it the praise it deserves. And finally, Robert Englund, however I'm supposed to say it, England, whatever it is of course fantastic as Freddy. He does have some one-liners here, but they don't feel out of place. Like, they work. The humor in this movie really works, and I think that, I have to give him major credit. He plays my favorite slasher of all time, and he does it really well in this film once again. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is one of the best horror sequels of all time. They managed to bring back familiar characters in a smart way while also introducing lovable new ones. If the last one turned you off from the franchise, I totally understand, but give this one a chance. You will not regret it. I'm gonna give A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors a 4.5 out of 5. It's the same grade I give to the first one, so that says a lot about it. As for problems, there may be the odd scene that feels a little bit weird, or there's, maybe the odd time where I'm like, oh, okay, let's just, you could have cut that, but not in the way of like the runtime or anything. There's just some like weirdly written scenes, I guess, but maybe that is because there were so many writers on here. I now will watch this film every single year. I did rewatch 2, but just because I wanted to go 1, 2, and 3, just kind of refresh my memory. I probably won't be watching 2. Actually, I'll probably have to watch it next year when I watch them all, but that movie really sucks. But number 1 and number 3 are amazing, and if you've seen this movie, which I hope you have, please tell me what you think of it down below, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next time.
Over and out.